While not the most popular anime of its season, this was still a really enjoyable series with one of my favorite combinations of isekai and food, so let's forge ahead and of course, spoiler warning. Just following the order of events, Mukoto gets summoned and is given 20 gold because he asks for 2 to 3 months of living expenses. Given that this was released in January of 2016, at the time this was worth about $17-20 US according to the breakdown given in the novel and post-credit anime scene. That's kind of reasonable, I guess. Immediately using this money, he paid off some kids. In the anime they asked for money, and in the novel he was smarter, offering to buy them skewers in exchange for the info. While he didn't directly say it in the manga, we can see kids holding skewers, so it probably went the same way. Unfortunately, these kids were mentioned to be orphans whose parents died in the war the country started. With his newly obtained info, the novel version of Mukoto openly accepts he's living in a genre, and a shitty version of said genre. He hates how generic it is, which is pretty ironic. So naturally, he wants to dip from the country, starting with apparently a 4-day trip via carriage to the edge of the country. He then hired Iron Will, who actually had a lot of options of quests for people wanting to leave the country. According to the novel, Mukoto was on the lower end of the offers to leave, but the food was really the clincher for them, so the decision wasn't as immediate. Iron Will themselves in the anime looked exactly like the manga, but the novel describes things a bit differently. For Werner, it was his thick arms carried many old scars. Ramon was a stoic old man with white in his hair, and Franco was wearing white clothes that reminded me of a nun's habit. By the way, she had a huge chest. His words. Now we get into the bread and butter of things, pun intended. Cooking. There are quite a few recipes throughout all 3 mediums, and sometimes meals were skipped. For example, the sandwiches weren't in the manga. Also, recipes frequently changed. This might be due to them making the dishes in real life, but I have no proof of that. The other repeated differences are brands, which anime are typically pretty strict about, but in this case, the novel and manga avoided brand names entirely, saying things are from a certain company, but the anime is like, look, Abara! Anyways, Big Doggo Fell comes in, and in the novel, they didn't even see him coming because of how engorged they were with the food. The anime actually removed a kind of funny scene here when they first make their pact. Fell immediately identified Mukoto and could tell he was summoned from another world, and proceeded to say it out loud, which made Mukoto jump at him to shut him up. Mukoto is also far less respectful to Fell in the novel, which is crazy that the bar can go lower. There's a lot more comments like, I guess even a rotten legendary beast is still legendary or something, and very frequently calls him a gluttonous snack hound. You know, it's kind of impressive how many people can identify a Fenrir though, considering one hasn't been seen in 300 years. Apparently one was contracted before though, 700 years ago. So they reach the next town, and I gotta say, Mukoto is smarter than the manga and anime give him credit for. Before even reaching this town in the novel, he was fully informed about the entry fee and the guilds because of his prior research. Naturally, he laments how cliché it all is, including the gathering quests and the way you have to bring the paper to the desk at the Adventurers Guild, but he puts up with it, just like all of us. Moving on, we have a nice morning scene added in here. We also have an interesting guild employee who seems very interested in Fell, which is only anime side. You know what else the anime added in? Parmesan. Definitely an upgrade. Other meals were different too. In the anime they were given orc meat, and in the manga and novel it was red boar, so what they made was pretty different. The anime had pork piccata, whereas the other two had vegetable stir fry. Speaking of the novel, since this is the first time we had monsters get mass disassembled, this is also the first time the novel goes into great description as to what each part is used for and how much they're worth. It does this every time monsters get disassembled throughout the entire series, so I'll mention it now just to cover all future occurrences. There's also a pretty funny line from the novel. My country makes no compromises and cares about its food more than any other would, I think. That was changed to, the country I'm from never compromises when it comes to food, they always hunger for new foods and flavors. And honestly, I can't tell if it's a translation thing or not, but I like to think they didn't want to low-key insult all other countries. Next we have a novel exclusive meal, Makunochi Bento, and the manga skipped the cockatrice meal before our intro to magic. Magic was introduced earlier in the novel, but whatever. I feel like Novel Fell is a bit of a meaner teacher. Not only does he scoff every time Mukoto fails a spell, but when he brought him to the goblin settlement, he fully ditched him. Granted, this was to kill the high-rank goblins, but that's not a fun situation to be left alone in. Apparently, the sweet buns that were bought after were meant as a punishment for Fel, assuming he did not like sweets, but that backfired a bit. More extras from the novel, since it's clearly quite detailed, is Mukota's absolute disdain for his title, Victim from Another World, which he is actively trying to get rid of. Also, there was a location they very briefly visited in the novel, a town that really did not want them there, so they promptly left. Because of this extra time, they got to have giant deer steaks, which wasn't present in the anime or manga. This leads into the next town they visit, where the anime seems to have fully removed slaves and beastmen. I know there's a beastman in season 2, but all mention and presence of them here is gone. They straight up deleted racism. And then there was the library. The anime and manga skipped over it. Hell, in the manga he didn't even go, which is fair because I really don't think the several page lesson about magic was necessary. I think the only thing of note that was spoken about was the info about holy magic. Apparently it can only be owned if you're blessed by a god, and the only thing they know about its power is that it can destroy a country. Unfortunately for Fel, who has holy magic, this coincides with the Fenrir destroying a country story, so it's likely Fel that destroyed a country, not some other Fenrir, which the novel said there are less than 10 of. While we don't know for sure, Fel is probably the only one that is blessed by a god, probably the only one that eats like Kirby too. For those keeping score at home, we're on to episode 5 now, which was largely the same, bar some scene sequence changes. I think the biggest change is the novel-exclusive fish, the king of the pond, normally only found when a lake dries up because of how fast they are, the 3-meter-long lake shark. He sells this in the future, and the anime just sums it into the reward money for destroying a goblin settlement. Some minor changes include Mukota testing casting water ball and wind cutter, and Sui's appearance in the novel and manga was more Mukota thinking it's cute, let's give it some trash. He cleared out his entire garbage stock feeding Sui. Another interesting thing about Sui is that the novel notes it doesn't have eyes and never mentions the little heart. It directly contradicts itself in its own art. Another small change is Ninrir. She was really holding herself back according to the novel, but the dorayaki really pushed her over the edge. It seems gods can channel divine power into their mirror pool to see into other worlds, and she happened across Earth a really long time ago and has been craving sweets from Earth ever since. Normally the only sweets she gets are dried fruit and honey. Oh, and free product placement. Then we get to the dungeon. Anime Fel wanted to bring him there because he figures Mukota needs to be able to protect himself, but the manga and novel, he's just really exasperated by his lack of progress. He keeps a barrier up 24/7 so he doesn't actually think Mukota needs to protect himself. This entire sequence had quite a few differences, with I think the most notable being the classic change in amount of graphic violence. While the manga censored a lot of it, Mukota's comments about Sui's acid kills, in any other situation, I'd barf at this gruesome scene. Not like tearing them apart with rocks is much better. That's the entire point they were there, with Novel Fel warning Mukota after his use of Fireball that if he did it again, he'd ditch him there. However, Novel Fel isn't completely heartless. He did warn them of the Kobold King ahead of time, and the lie about the barrier not lasting was anime only. Sui also got its upgrade in this dungeon, though we didn't see it in the novel or manga like in the anime, probably triggered by the Kobold King. The novel said Sui bathed the Kobold King in a large amount of acid with a splurt. The Kobold King didn't even have time to scream before it melted to the ground. That's just air escaping. Then suddenly Sui could speak, and we have Uncle Fel, which novel and manga Mukota were threatened for saying. Now on to greener pastures, passing through a forest to reach the slave-free oceanside countries. The manga hasn't done anything particularly crazy up until this point, but I think its biggest changes are in this section. The biggest change is a randomly added hot spring scene. Somehow they found one in the forest. The manga version of Mukota also freaked out way more when he found out they were only halfway after 3 weeks. I don't know how relevant this is going to be, but the manga also didn't give Mukota the griffin feather as thanks. The novel, as you'd expect, has more detail. It mentioned that during the Orthrus attack, the other 4 that weren't killed were there to stop their stupid friend, and Orthrus is not edible. A couple other things the novel said is that healing mushrooms are used in elixirs, and griffins are apparently bigger than Fel. Anime's turn. I had mentioned recipe changes before, but the anime made a completely different dish with the black snake. Chili Black Serpent. For the other 2 it was Snake Karage. Finally, the full fight at the cart didn't seem to have made the cut. They were attacked by an overly brave man and the results... well... I really was about to throw up. Not only had he taken Fell's rending claw head on, but he was also hit with Sui's acid bullet. One could imagine what the body looked like. This is actually where volume 1 of the novel ends. Normally I wouldn't even mention that, but I've never seen so many short stories at the end of a book. It occupies 1/4 of the total pages in this thing. These stories include some of the post-credit scenes up until this point, as well as a story of Mukoto's life before he was summoned, a story of Ninra's life before Mukoto was summoned, a story of what if Mukoto settled down and opened a restaurant, a story about Sui's perspective and how he was born and found, a story about Sui's perspective in the dungeon, a story about making pancakes out of cockatrice eggs, a story about Fell's fight with the ancient dragon, 4 separate stories about the gods enjoying their requested items, even though 3 of them haven't even been introduced or even mentioned in any way, and finally a story about making spare rib stew. On to volume 2, where Mukoto deduces that people of rank C seem to be able to tell that Fell is a Fenrir just by looking at him. Another novel thing is that the adventurers don't actually laugh at Mukoto for having a slime because Lars is with them and he commands too much local respect. Also, a fun scene from the novel, after seeing the size of Mukoto's item box, the other members of Phoenix tried recruiting him to their party, but stopped after Fell gave them a growl. They promptly leave, with one going after the guild employee named Sandra who was mentioned earlier, and Mukoto sees him off while thinking, normies should just explode. So he's that kind of person. This isn't even the last time he calls someone a normie, the other time being Lambert and his wife with a... these damn normies. Getting back on track, let's look at their foods this time around. The anime actually skips some tandoori rockbird this episode. They make up for it by diversifying the sweet scent to Ninrir, crazy wide variety. Also, near the end, the anime had savory buns instead of the usual sweet buns, which is what the novel and manga had. It lets us see different things, but unfortunately we miss out on things like manga Fell covered in chocolate. Other than that, we have questing. Apparently the manga had an ocean-based quest Fell really wanted, but instead we got the 227 goblin speedrun to accumulate points. I don't think it was explained in the manga or anime, but apparently to get from rank G to F, it takes 100 points, and a goblin hunt is 3. Among those 227 goblins, Novel Fell also hunted a goblin king, goblin generals, goblin mages, and goblin soldiers. It was also mentioned at this time in the novel and manga that normally when slimes hit a certain level, they split, which is how they proliferate. I do kinda like how in the anime and manga though, Sui helps him cook like a child would. It's cute. Going back to the novel though, since it has all the extra details, let's look at more of its, well, extra details. Before Mukoto can turn down the C rank promotion, it's Fell that cuts him off and says they'll do it because it's more convenient for them. Since the guildmaster obviously knows Fell's a Fenrir, especially after that interaction, Mukoto decides to sell off the rare monsters because this is the chance since the secret's already out. This led to them locking down the shop to check out the monsters. This is where that lake shark was sold. The guild wanted to buy some of the meat but was obviously turned down, and Fell requested steaks with that meat. Also, with the deal now set in place, the guildmaster contacted other guildmasters about the deal to clear out their A and S rank missions. Of the quests they were given, for some reason the metal lizard was requested to be dealt with first. Also, they did the requests over a few days, not all at once. I know that was a lot at once from the novel, but the manga and anime were largely the same covering all this. If nothing else, the manga actually removed the rock bird and pepper stir-fry dish, and skipped the red snake karage. The manga does skip a lot for some reason, but it added Sui sitting in the bag until the bag was bought, so it gets extra cute points. This bit with the bags actually confused me a bit. The novel had an extra type of bag, a black snake leather bag, and a black snake leather wallet. The wallet in the anime said snake leather, and the manga said it was sand snake leather. I guess it doesn't matter. Oh yeah, and Mukoto bought more clothes that look exactly the same as he already has. Sure makes it easier for the artist. He got new shoes too, and the anime didn't mention that his shoes are the same ones he was summoned in. I can't imagine wearing shoes like that for that long. Now we're ready to go questing again, starting with the mithril lizard. According to the novel, Mukoto got a truck bed's worth of mithril even though Fell told him he didn't need it. Anime Fell even going so far as to crush it beneath his foot. There was a lunch break after the lizard in the novel where they had some leftovers along with pork cutlet and katsudon. Then there was the cow hunt. I've mentioned violence a few times, well, here's an actual quote from the novel. There were giant black cows tipped over in the lake of blood. Huge numbers of them. What is up with this hellscape? Luckily, Sui can clean all that up. Makes more sense why he had to remind himself it was a picnic in the anime. The smell and look of that much blood would put off most anyone's appetite. Also, I had mentioned product placement already, so I wasn't going to do it again, but Pepsi? Really? Okay, I don't drink cola, but that surprised me. Anyways, the manga gets one moment in the spotlight with a cute scene with Phoenix and Iron Will. Now, back to the novel. Mukoda actually kept one of the bloody bull hides which he later gave to Lambert as a gift. I also found this difference in instructions interesting. In the novel he says, season the meat just before cooking it, failing to do that will allow the umami to leave the meat. Opposed to the animes, if you salt it too soon before grilling, you might lose some of the umami. I have no idea which of these is true, to be honest. Continuing the novel, Fell absolutely raised a flag by saying he wanted a wyvern swarm. Then there's the stuff with the goddesses. You know, Mukoda did admit he forgot to send an offering, but he also commented that it had not yet been a week since the last offering, so the goddesses are really greedy. He did get a kick out of the fighting a bit though. Ha ha ha, that disappointing goddess is getting chewed out by her friends. Agni did ask for alcohol here though, but the others told her no because it would attract the other gods. I wonder if it was even worth the blessings. Sui with the full blessing though, his stats were shown in the novel and they're higher than the supposed heroes when they were first summoned at this point, so he is kinda crazy now. The new magic definitely helps. Wait, is that a Totoro reference? Oh yeah, and Fell was actually pretty understanding of his stone house in the manga and novel. At this point, I realize it probably would have been smarter to keep a list of foods for the end that were skipped and well, too late now. Anime skipped a chicken nanban meal and chicken nanban sandwiches. And back to the guild they go, where we learned that the bags of gold have 300 gold each, and a bag is a standardized measurement. That means technically he got paid less in the anime because there was one less bag. Very technical. Not like it matters. By the end of the season, they're absolutely swimming in money. Not to mention, the novel and manga said butchering was free for them in this town because of how much money they brought in for the guild. It's at this point that Mukoda finally has some foresight and in the novel and manga prepares a lot of food ahead of time. Tons of rice, rice balls, fried foods, and since it wasn't mentioned in the anime and it magically appeared, he bought frozen fries while he was frying. Included with the things he served in this meal in the novel was a cheese-stuffed chicken cutlet, and that sounds real good right about now. But now we get a break from food and get into the beauty product stuff, which was a neat and fun turn, wasn't it? The manga opens it up with probably the greatest beauty ad I've ever seen. We start with the baths, and the only thing I want to add to what was said in the manga is that the bathtubs are really expensive because they need crushed magic stones into it to make it harder and retain heat. The actual deal they made was much the same, aside from your usual product placement. There was a scene the anime cut where Lambert sent a kid to get Mukoda, and Mukoda fed him since they were eating, which is a fun little thing. The novel also had the nitty-gritty talk of prices, wholesale prices, the amount of space they'll take in the store, all that jazz, but it was mostly guided by Lambert's wife. As per Mukoda, I see Lambert's been whipped. Before moving on to the wyverns, two small things. First, anime and manga skipped another meal of ground meat and eggplant sweet and spicy Chinese miso stir fry with cheese stuffed chicken cutlet and cheese stuffed hamburger steak. Second, there was a chapter about the summon dude's perspective from episode 1 in the novel, and he is super cringe and I hope he never comes back. Wyverns now. It probably goes without saying, but the adventurers that were attacked by the wyverns looked worse in the novel. Well, they were described worse. They actually just look like words on a page. So the wyverns. Bet you could guess, but beheading things isn't exactly clean. It was very bloody. Oh, and during the actual fight, Novel 3 never actually protected Mukoda, but it did drain all the blood from all the wyverns, drinking from their neck stubs. Yummy. Fancy some black pudding? It also cleaned all the blood from the field again. Coming back, mentioning the 13 wyverns led them to learn that had they not been there, it's likely the guards and adventurers would have suffered at least a 50% mortality rate. The tangible fear from both the guards and the adventurers led the manga and novel guildmaster and guard captain to want to retrain their troops. Wyverns are a serious threat though. In the manga, Phoenix rushed back to help with it. Not only that, they're hard to disassemble. They need to use a mithril blade like the one in season 2 to cut them. Then the bit with the goddesses. This was pretty fast in the anime, but the manga and novel had more. The manga opened it up with a bonus chapter where the goddesses are debating on who should send an oracle since it could be detected by the creator god. They were able to send their secret oracles after because it's hard to identify oracles in a two-way connection when Mukoda is praying. Agni only agreed to send the oracle because they let her ask for alcohol to send it. With their blatant greed, the novel has Mukoda outright call them divine disappointments. The arguing was so bad, he actually set them a limit in the novel to 3 silver each. They took turns requesting things from his shop, and Kishal actually got higher quality beauty products that he sold customized to her. He asked her about her problems, and with the wealth of options from his online market, got her what she needs. This is actually something he learned from his sister. He says, "My older sister was a beauty nut, and while we were at home would often say things like, 'Nowadays even men have to pay attention to their looks,' and she would push the shampoos, conditioners, face lotions, and other beauty products she no longer used onto me." For Agni and Rusalka, he had given homemade food and guesstimated the price of those. We're nearing the end. What's next? The bath. While looking at baths in the manga and anime, the Ilario company provided a couch for Fel. They made their purchase for a mere 370 gold, no payment plan option in the novel, and they were on their way. Mukoda made his little bathhouse with the top open to release humidity and see the sky according to the novel and manga. The novel even had him use what they called a bathing poker, which I think is a Hinoki bath stirring rod? I've never heard of a bathing poker before. Anyways, they washed Fel too. In the novel, they buried all the fur they brushed off him. Novel Mukoda mentions he has never seen Fel groom himself, so there was a lot of fur. The novel was also pretty descriptive about what shampoo they used and how to apply it. Oh yeah, and the Earth Dragon. The novel described it as a 5-meter long Komodo dragon. The anime and manga version looks more T-Rexy to me, but that's just opinion. So let's talk about the final meals of Season 1. In the anime, that's the beef bowls and stew made out of wyvern. The beef bowls were entirely skipped in the manga, and in the novel made them out of bloodhorn bull because they didn't have wyvern meat yet. The anime had additional pickled red ginger, and in the novel, they had an onsen egg on top of the gyudon. And that's it. For the anime. Everything wraps up and they head to the next town after some final goodbyes, including these kids from the Sui manga side story. But the novel has a bit more for us. After cleaning Fel, they go to pick up the wyvern materials and finally get the meat. From the partial materials the guild bought and the subjugation, Mukoda is given 3,971 gold. He's also given an additional 10 gold for the potion used on the party he saved. Quick reminder, that's like $341,506 US, and even still they don't even get to eat the meat yet because they go to see Lambert first. It's not only to bring him a restock, but to request a wyvern mantle, shoes, and belt made with one of the wyvern hides. It's a good time to mention, Mukoda does regularly use a mantle when traveling with others so as to not seem suspicious. This request of his is going to take 6 months, so they do have to return here. In terms of stock, Lambert travels to restock, so he'll ask the Adventurers Guild where Mukoda is and go visit him to restock on the beauty products. Now they're finally ready to go to the next city, the Ocean City, not the dungeon one. The Guildmaster lays out their path showing the cities that are requesting help with A and S rank quests, so really, they're told about the Dungeon City, but it's kind of just on their way. We also get some info on the fishers in the ocean town and how tough they are, because apparently instead of being scared of monsters, they just fight them off. We also have the manga guildmaster asking Mukoda if he's going to become a citizen of their city, which obviously he turns down. And finally, we get to the wyvern meat. Wyvern steaks, seasoned with fancy salt and pepper with a glass of wine. Mukoda also makes Hamburg steak out of the wyvern and thinly cuts it for shabu shabu or maybe sukiyaki. He does this while prepping as much food as he can for the travels to come, and now we're all caught up to the anime. And that's all from me for today. Believe it or not, I had 13 pages of notes for this one, so I had to skip a lot. I did my best. Tell me if you'd want all the notes posted somewhere. It's something I've thought of, but yeah. If you liked it, be sure to comment if you'd want a comparison on a specific series. Honestly, it takes a lot of time to do so I usually do series I like, and I can't promise anything. But do the YouTube thing, like, sub, and I'll see you around.